Everyone, and welcome to the Retro Channel and to part 2 of the Sega SC-3000 repair slash restoration. Today I want to get some better video quality out of this thing. I don't really want to have to rely on RF output, and I'll probably check out the original power supply, see if that's still working, and of course test out the keyboard and hopefully play some games, along with giving this thing a good thorough clean. So let's start with, I guess, the power supply, just so I don't have to rely on powering this thing off the bench power supply anymore. So it is rated for 9 volts DC, 1.1 amp. I guess the easiest thing to do is just plug it in and see if it explodes. Alright, so it didn't explode or make any weird noises, so let's just test what's coming out of it. If anything, 13.9 volts. It does seem a bit high, but it doesn't have the actual console loading it down. So let's just plug it in and see what happens. I think it'll be okay. Pretty sure once we get some load on there, it should be fine. Right. System powered up, that's always a good start. Let's just see if I can find a nice spot to check that voltage. This should be ground. 10.1 volts, yeah, I'd say that should be perfectly fine. So power supply is still good, that's a good start. Now, the video output. So there is a DIN connector on the back for video output. I guess the easiest way to see what is there is just to probe it on the scope. So the oscilloscope is powered on, ready to go. Let's just see what we have on this DIN connector. That looks like a bunch of nothing, as does that. That appears to be ground. That's a bunch of nothing. And that is a composite video signal. And looking at the back of the DIN connector, it appears that the 3 middle pins are ground. This one over here is where we saw our composite video. So I'm gonna take a guess and say that this one is audio. I suppose I could plug in a game and see if it does anything. That might be a good idea before we go plugging stuff in that shouldn't be plugged into there. Okay, yes, it's definitely audio on that pin. So right side is our composite video, left side is our audio. And of course I don't have any 5-pin DIN connectors available. I've got an 8-pin one, but I don't really want to push the extra pins out of it. I do have an Atari, the 8-bit computer DIN connector, which is 5-pin, but I'm not sure of the pin out, so I'll just check it with the multimeter. Hopefully our composite video will end up going straight to here. Right, the multimeter is beeping, but it's actually reading 75 ohms, so that's actually probably going to a ground, as is that, and that. Aha. So our red should be composite video. Or our white, yeah, because the audio is connected together on this DIN plug. So that's composite video. Maybe the audio is going to... No, wait, that was going to ground, wasn't it? So I think the audio is going to one of the pins on the S-video socket, either Luma or Chroma. Let me just poke something in there. Obviously I'll make up a proper cable later on, but if we can get away with just repurposing this... that pin's falling apart. If we can get away with repurposing this, then I'll do that. Right, there it is. So that's our audio. I think I've got that right, but there's one way to find out. Yes. Audio. Yep. probably hard to see on the camera, but the picture quality is pretty shocking. Not a big surprise, I guess, but at least I have composite video and audio out. Right, so it didn't look so great on the plasma display. It was jittering up and down, but looking at it on the Sony CRT, it's perfectly stable. So yeah, it's just incompatibility with a more modern display, which is quite common for these older systems. So we've got the power supply sorted out. We've at least got video and audio out of it without having to rely on the RF. Let's give this thing a proper cleanup, I think. And I also might sort out this power switch situation, because it's a bit of a pain in the ass. If I want to pull the board out, I have to desolder the power switch every time. Pretty lazy on Sega's part, but yeah, I'll figure something else out for that. So now that I've actually spent some time with this board, I have sort of worked out where everything is and what it all does. I did also go around and check out some of the electrolytic capacitors just to make sure they were still in spec. And they all tested fine. A couple of them I had to remove from circuit to test, but they were all fine except for this one, which is a 6.3 volt 47 microfarad. It's actually on this little daughter board, C118. It tested about 35 microfarad, which is out of the 20% tolerance. So I did replace that, but even on the capacitance meter, they all seem to be perfectly fine. Even this one, even though the actual capacitance seems to be out of spec. So I popped a new one of those in, but that just goes to the RF output anyway. So certainly nowhere near as bad as some of Sega's later systems. Looking at you, Game Gear. Anyway, now that I'm familiar with this thing, we can take a tour of the board. So obviously we've got our expansion port connector. We know all the stuff on the back. This over here is the NEC D780C, which is basically a clone of the Z80 CPU. This Sega chip here, the Mytek 2, is basically a logic array, so like a PLA and a Commodore 64, that kind of thing. So it's just a bunch of logic squeezed into one IC. There is the 2K of SRAM, which is for the system RAM. We've got our 16K of DRAM for the video VDP. There's a little bit of logic. This daughter board is actually what's taking the video output from the TMS 9929 and converting that to a composite video signal and the RF output. So the 9929 has a luma and 2 color difference signals, so you need to convert that into composite video and then RF. It is possible to pull component video out of this. It does need to be massaged a little bit to get it into component video specs. And of course there is the TMS RGB mod, which I might investigate at some point. I think I priced them up. They're about 60 or 70 Australian dollars. So not a huge thing that I want to worry about now, but I might do RGB out of this instead of composite video, because the composite looks pretty hard. And that way I can get rid of this little daughter board as well. Something for the future. Also for the future, I did see that there is the Mega Cart, which is a multi-cartridge, which would be pretty cool just to be able to run all the software that's available for both the SC-3000 and the SG-1000 just off a single cartridge. I could probably like pop one of these open and pull out the ROM and program my own and swap games that way, but that would get pretty tedious, I think. Also going to look at maybe upgrading the RAM in this. I did pull it apart and there is the placements there for the extra RAM ICs. So I'll grab a couple of extra RAM and upgrade this from the, I think it's got 16K at the moment, so I'll upgrade it to 32K. Looks to be a pretty straightforward procedure, but that's a job for another day when the RAM ICs arrive. Anything else I didn't mention on this board? Oh yes, the NEC chip here. This is like a peripheral interface adapter, so handles the control ports and keyboard, I guess the printer port. This little guy here is actually like a little single inline package, and it is labeled Mytek HIC1. So I'm guessing that is just a analog to digital converter for the cassette port. Yeah, that's about all there is to this machine. Obviously, there's nothing on the back apart from our 7805. So yeah, pretty basic, but does the job, I guess. Let's hook up the keyboard again because I want to test that out, and then we'll give it a proper clean and see if there's anything that we need to sort out with the keyboard. Right, well, the keyboard seems to work just fine except for this space bar, which I was worried about. Seems to work more reliably over this side, and looking at it closely, it also seems to be a little bit firmer on this side, so maybe this is collapsed somewhere. So I'll pull this apart, give it a good clean up, obviously clean up the case while I'm at it, and hopefully we'll stick all this back together and finally play some games on this thing. Alright, so the case has had a clean up. I soaked the top part in some warm soapy water, and I just went over the bottom with some window cleaner, just because I didn't want to destroy this label any further than it's already deteriorated. So that's all that done. Unfortunately, the spacebar is damaged and there's not a lot I can do about it. It basically fell apart when I removed the keyboard, and yeah, it's been sort of eaten up. It looks like there's bits of it already missing, so I don't know if somebody's been in here or if they've just pulled stuff out of the top. I mean, there is a little bit of damage around the spacebar, so it's possible somebody's just been picking at it or something, but yeah, not a lot we can do there. I did replace the feet on the bottom of the case, so it did have two black feet on this side, but it was missing the feet on the other side, so I just replaced all of them with some clear feet, and yeah, it looks pretty good. I don't think I'd be able to find the same two black feet that were already on there, so I just replaced the lot. Now, the board, I do want to fix up a couple of things. One of them is just sorting out this mess of cables that goes to this daughter board. That's pretty straightforward with just a little cable tie, hopefully. There we go, just a little cable tie action. Now, I also brought out the thermal cam again and just had a look to see what was getting hot. And the main things are the processor and the VDP. So those two are going to get heat sinks, which I have right here. The processor is quite easy because it's obviously out in the open. The VDP is a little bit more challenging because it does sit under that daughter board and there's not enough clearance under there to get a heat sink on it. So let's just clean off the top of this and clean off the side of the VDP. Now again, CPU is the easy one. Just want to get it nice and center. Obviously, if you go sticking heat sinks on, try and, you know, center them so it at least looks half decent. And for the VDP, I think I can just manage to get it just under that connector, so it's not quite centered on the IC itself, but it should still have a decent effect in keeping that cool. Everything else should be okay. They get to about 30 odd degrees, but the CPU got to about 40 odd degrees and the VDP was getting past 50. So heat will generally kill anything. So the cooler we can keep them, hopefully the longer they'll last. That's really all the heat sinks done. The other thing, of course, is this power switch. So it sits in the case and obviously goes into the case from the outside. And then once the main board is in, it gets soldered to these two posts. So when it's soldered together, you can't get the main board out because you have to desolder the switch and pop it out of the case and then get the main board out. So I don't know if it was just a Friday at Sega and somebody was just like, that'll do. But yeah, it's not the ideal solution. So what I'm going to do is put in a couple of little terminals here. So I had these already pre-crimped. I think I just chopped them off something else, but these should work ideal, so I can just unplug them from the switch anytime I need to pull the main board out. And then we just replace these two posts with these two wires. Let's do that. Alright, so that should do it. They've got a decent amount of length, just so if I have it in the case and I want to just remove the board, I can always just flip it over and still leave the switch itself connected. So that should work out just fine. Really the only other thing that bugs me are these long jumper wires. I think they're just ground wires, and maybe this unnecessarily long system clock wire. It just looks a bit janky. These ones are okay because they're sort of sitting flat to the board, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of these. Might just tidy them up. Alright, I'm pretty happy with how the board is looking. Let's reassemble this thing one last time. Right, so finally the case is clean and reassembled. Now I don't know how it comes across on the camera. There's a lot of glare in this room from all the lights around here, but it looks 10 times better in real life. Now normally I'd use the 303 UV protectant. This time I've actually gone for the Meguiar's Ultimate Black. It's also a UV protectant, but it's just designed for black plastic and rubber, so that's what I went with. It does leave the plastic a little bit greasy, so you do have to buff it off a couple of times just to get rid of that greasy feel, but once it's buffed up, it's shiny. So yeah, I'm happy with how this looks, and I think it is finally time to play some games. I don't know how many times I've said that during the last two videos, but yeah, let's fire up some games, check them out. Now I don't have the original controller for this machine, but I do have a Master System controller, which is almost the same generation. I've seen images of the original controllers for these things, and to be honest, I don't think I'd want to use them if I had one. Not to say that the Master System controller is that much better, if anyone's used one of these, but could be worse. So the first game I tried out was Champion Tennis, and it probably wasn't the best game to start off with. Maybe I'm just not a fan of sports or tennis games in general, or that Pong kind of game, but yeah, I quickly turned this off after a couple of minutes. The next one I tested out was Congo Bongo. Definitely an improvement over tennis in my opinion, but again, it's only worth a couple of minutes gameplay before it gets fairly repetitive. So the third game that I have on hand is N-Sub, and yeah, this probably kept me entertained for about 15 or 20 minutes, which is a far sight better than the other two games. There is a bit of a difficulty curve, so it does get a little bit harder, I think, in round 3. There's a couple more enemy subs on the screen, and then in round 6 it actually speeds up the game, so it feels really sluggish at first. Once you get to round 6 and beyond, it's actually not that bad to play. Unfortunately, it doesn't get any harder from what I can tell. I've made it all the way up to round 13 and I was still doing the same thing over and over, and I guess I kind of got bored, took more risks and eventually died, and I was like, well, that's fine. I don't really want to play it anymore anyway. But of course, in saying all that, these are the only 3 games that I have, so I can't really judge the system on just these 3 games. But I will say that it's probably a good thing Sega revised their design, especially with the Mark III system, which then was released as the Master System, you know, worldwide. Because if they had a ran with this original hardware up against the Nintendo, I don't think there'd be any chance, and we probably wouldn't have seen, you know, the Mega Drive and Dreamcast, Saturn, all those kind of machines. So yeah, not the greatest thing in the world, but definitely happy that it exists. And I just like the look of this thing. Like, I like it. For something that came out in, what, 83? It's a nice looking machine. You could certainly do a lot worse. So really the only thing left to do is find a space for it on the shelf back here. And if I end up getting a multi-cart, or if we end up doing a video mod to this, we'll bring it back out and check it out one more time. But yeah, I like the machine. I certainly like the look of it. But yeah, these games. So a big thanks for everyone for watching, subscribing, leaving comments, and a massive thanks to the people that support the channel on Patreon. And for now, that's going to do it for the SC-3000. I hope you enjoyed it, and consider, you know, supporting the channel. Links down below. But until next time, thanks for watching. Bye.